What are good ways to study for the SAT? I've taken the SAT once, but for some reason I'm stuck and lost in what I should study and how I should study besides Khan Academy. So Khan Academy, definitely a good resource, more so I think for math and for writing than for reading. I've talked about this a lot in previous live streams. It's a good resource, but certainly it's not enough, right? You're going to need some other kind of assistance, whether it's books, courses, tutoring, something in addition to Khan Academy and practice tests. So let me just list out some resources you can use. I have a study plan course. It's a free study plan course that goes through a lot of this and talks about the different ways to set up a study plan on your own. So check out, again, the link below. It goes into more details on this. But let's go through the gamut here of what you should be using or what you could use. So practice tests / practice sections, very important. I talk about how to use them in a lot of my courses, in the study plan course, for example. Let me just add that this is free. So that's a huge resource. That's going to be the core of your program, the core of your studying, because you want to use real material as much as possible. Second thing would be, well, we already have like Khan Academy. That would be useful as well. Again, supplemental targeting your resources. My YouTube channel, which of course you already know about because you're watching this video. This live stream. My YouTube channel got a ton of videos. I release videos a lot on the SAT and the ACT, but also the SAT. So make sure you can work your way through those. My video courses on my website, reasonprep.com, can help you with this. Both free and paid courses. What else? Books. So I get a lot of questions about what I think the best SAT prep book is, and my general advice on this is to go with books that are by tutors, by independent professionals. The third-party big box books like Princeton Review, Barron's, etc., they're okay for additional practice, but I think I generally find better material with tutors' books. So there's plenty of stuff out there. Pone the SAT for Math is good. Erica Melcher's stuff on verbal, on the English and the reading and the grammar, that's good as well. So books, of course, tutoring in classes, that goes without saying, if that's an option. Obviously not if you're looking for a self-prep, but just throw it out there. Another thing you could do is flashcards, and I talk about this as well in my study plan course. So flashcards for vocabulary, for math formulas, for grammar concepts, for whatever can help add some structure to your studying. So yeah, I would say this is some of the resources you could use in addition to Khan Academy. But check out my study plan. I specifically go through how you set up a study plan, the kinds of activities you should be doing in the study plan, daily, weekly, how often you should study, how you should break your studying up, how much you should be studying per day. It's all in my free study plan course. So I would redirect you there for a more comprehensive explanation, more comprehensive explanation or guidance on how you might study more effectively. How close is the PSAT to the SAT? I got a 1480 on the PSAT, but I don't know how that converts. So theoretically, the way they've designed the PSAT is this should be, at least the theory goes, what you would have gotten on an equivalent SAT if you had taken the SAT on that date. So in theory, this should be equal to your SAT score. That's essentially the theory of how it maps. That on if you had taken the SAT that day instead of the PSAT, you would have gotten a 1480. They do this by making the curves of the SAT versus PSAT work out in a certain way. Now that's the theory. I've seen when you actually take the test, it kind of bounce all over the place. So we have to keep in mind that often when you take the SAT, it's later in the year, so that might make a difference. But I've seen students very often do better on the real SAT than their PSAT score would warrant, and I see some students do not as well as their PSAT report. I will say just on average, statistically, so the claim goes, it should be equivalent to your SAT score. That should be kind of your baseline. So that's good news, obviously. So 1480 is really solid. But again, you really have to ultimately take the test and see how it bounces out for you. Even though it's an average, even though it's statistically average, everyone's different, circumstances differ, so you might end up a little higher or lower. But I wouldn't expect you to be too far, either in the high or low direction from this score, unless you've done a lot of prep or you're significantly older, anything like that. I plan to take the SAT Math 2 subject tests, and I'm very nervous as to what to expect. My SAT tests, I've been hitting 700 plus, but I'm not sure how different the topics are and how to study. So the first thing you definitely need to do to address this is take a practice SAT 2. SAT Math Level 2 test. Because you need to get an idea what the test is like, not only due to the content, but also the format of the test, the timing. You only have an hour to do 50 questions, so the timing can sometimes be a bit tricky. So you definitely should take we'll add in here, a real practice SAT Math Level 2 test. That should be your first order of business to see where you're at. You need an idea of, so a 700 plus on the SAT is really nice for the math. That may not completely translate to the subject test because the subject test is harder. It does include more Algebra 2 topics and even a touch of kind of pre-calculus type topics. So it is harder than the regular SAT math. In terms of how to study, it's a little bit tougher for SAT subject tests because there's just not that many of them. What I recommend is you should get a prep book. This is where I think, unlike for the SAT or ACT, I think a third-party big box prep book like a Princeton Review or a Barron's is where you're going to want to go for this. So generally speaking, Princeton Review is easier than the real thing, whereas a Barron's is harder. So if you can swing it, the ideal would be to get both, get the Princeton Review and the Barron's or some equivalent. If you can only get one, I'd probably get the Barron's just to be thorough. But if you can get both, that's good. I also have courses on my website for both, or for the Math 2 test. So you might want to check that out. Go to the link below, rprep.co/courses. It's not a complete, it's not a course that goes through all of math up to pre-calculus, because of course that's absurd. There's no, that would be, I don't even know, hundreds of hours long of video, and no one's going to watch that. What it is I go through the 2 released official math tests in addition to some bonus problems that they've released, question by question, reviewing the concepts as we work through the question. So it's solution videos, but we also review the concepts. So you might want to check out my Math 2 course as well. So those would be the ingredients of what you want to do. The most important thing right now, though, is definitely take a practice test, see where you're at, get an idea of your level, and then isolate the weak topics that you have problems with and work on those with the prep book, with my course, with a tutor, a class, whatever you might end up taking. And yeah, that's basically the formula. How do I create an ACT study plan? I'm taking the ACT in September. So I have a full course on this. Instead of just repeating everything I say in the course, which would be kind of redundant, check out my study plan course. The whole idea behind it, I'll give you the basic outline of how it works, is study plan course, reasonprep.com. It's free. Free. The basic idea behind creating a study plan for the ACT, this also applies to the SAT, is as follows. This is the basic outline. Test is in September. She should be studying, let's say, 5 to 6 days per week. Each day you should dedicate to a different test. So one day English, the next day math, the next day reading, the next day science, rinse and repeat from there. Each day you can be doing various things to prepare. You could do a timed section from a real ACT, a real English section, or a real math section, a real reading section. You would take it timed. You would check your answers. You would review your answers, review every question, especially at first, especially the ones, of course, you got wrong, but even ones you got right. Review your answers. There are books, courses, like my courses, for example, that will go through the solutions to those questions. That's the core activity. It's doing timed practice sections. Do a full practice test, I would say, every 2 to 3 weeks about. You definitely don't want to do full practice tests after full practice tests. You do want to break it up. Other things you can do include reading prep books if you're using a prep book, working through their exercises, working through video courses like my courses. You can go to the link below this picture here, rprep.co/courses, to learn more about those. There are courses you can take. If you've got a tutor, your tutor, he or she might give you specific things to work on. If you're working on a class, they'll give you some stuff. You can do flashcards. You can do worksheets and packets. So it really depends on what resources you have, what weaknesses you have, what you want to work on to improve. So it's hard to give really targeted advice, but my study plan course does help you figure out how to set up a plan of your own. And that's the basic idea. Generally speaking, I advise studying about an hour to an hour and a half per day. Do so consistently. You don't want to take many days off because the whole idea is to do a little bit at a time, and that will build your strength up over a longer period of time, much more effective. And yeah, that's the basic outline. So more details, check out my study plan course. Approximately how much trig is on the ACT? So a decent amount. I would say 4 to 5 questions per test. You're going to see, your typical SOHCAHTOA, inverse trig. I'll just type it out. So the kinds of things you'll see: SOHCAHTOA, inverse trig. Sorry for hitting that. Degrees and radians, unit circles, law of sines, law of cosines, trig equations, trig identities, trig graphs. So you're going to see 4 to 5 questions per test. You're not going to see a question of all of these categories in every test. It will differ. But it's basically what you would have learned in a Algebra 2/trig class is essentially where we go. Maybe even sometimes, depending on the way your schools work, touching into a pre-calc kind of situation. So the trig can get kind of advanced sometimes. Those are the topics. Again, not every single one of these appears on every test. You're not always going to see a law of sines question. It is something that could show up. You're not always going to see questions about trig equations or anything like that. But this is the run of the topic. So it's pretty extensive. So if you're weak on these, it's going to be something you'll want to take a look at, especially if you need to get questions in the 40s and the 50s, right? The mediums and the hards, because that's where a lot of these ones live, especially the harder stuff, other than SOHCAHTOA. Should we annotate while taking the reading test on the ACT? No. I know some prep companies and tutors may recommend that. I do not. I've got a lot of reasons why I don't think it's a good use of time. My ACT reading course goes into more detail about this, but no. Annotating, which means like underlining the passage, writing in the margins, writing notes about the passage, generally speaking, is for most people going to be a waste. It's going to be not a net positive. Now, in the end, try it, see if it works for you. Like, if it makes you understand the passage better and you get a higher score, then do it. My position is, for most people, it's not going to be useful. So it's not something generally I recommend. You certainly don't need to do it to get a 36. I don't annotate the passages and I get a 36. And a lot of people don't annotate the passages and they get high scores. So even if you wanted to do it, you could, but it's certainly not required to get a high score. How much trig is on the SAT? Not much. 1 to 2 questions per test. Unlike the ACT, it's much more limited. SOHCAHTOA, degrees and radians, unit circles, and what's the other one? Common trig angles, like 30, 45, 60. That's it. There's really not much. So yeah, 1 to 2 questions. For most students, if you're not going for a 700, for example, it's not going to be something really relevant. If you are going for 700 plus, then you want to pay attention to it, but it's not a huge thing. There's so much more important about the test. What do they look for on the essay portion of the ACT? There's 4 things they're going to look for. There's 4 scores you get: ideas and analysis, development, and if I can spell development, and support, organization, and language use. I go into this in more detail in my ACT essay course, but to give you the basic rundown, the main thing you want to make sure you do, and what a lot of students don't do, well, 2 things. 1, make sure you have your own perspective or thesis on whatever the topic is, whatever the perspectives are. If your essay is just like summarizing the 3 perspectives they give you without your own point of view, you're going to run into problems with the ideas and analysis score. The second thing is be specific, be detailed, try not to be superficial. When you're talking about the perspectives, try to give examples, try to use reasoning to explain why the perspective you're talking about agrees with your perspective or disagrees with your own perspective, with your thesis, whatever it may be. That's the development and support score. Yeah, those are the main 2 things. Have your own thesis, your own perspective, and then 2, relate the perspectives given to your own thesis and be specific. Give examples, give reasoning, explain why they relate to each other the way they do. Oh, and third point, write as much as you can. Try to get to at least 3 pages, if not, more than 3 pages. How do you approach the science section without the chart graphs and charts? Do you want us to read the whole thing or just look at the key details? I'm assuming you're meaning the conflicting viewpoints questions. The conflicting viewpoints passage, I'm assuming that's what you mean, which is the one without graphs and figures. It's 7 questions. It's got like scientist 1, scientist 2, scientist 3, or student 1, student 2, student 3. For that long passage, I actually do recommend reading it quickly to get a sense of what they disagree about. And then you go to the questions. What you do then is you go to the questions. Don't do them in order. Do the questions that talk about one scientist or one student first. Then do the questions that compare and contrast more than one student or scientist. And then leave the ones that are about the entire passage to the end. That's the basic order of how you approach them. But yeah, do read the whole thing. Give it a quick read. Then do the questions from most specific to most general, from questions about one scientist or student to questions about more than one scientist or student to questions about everybody or everything about the passage. I go into more details on this in my YouTube videos. I think I've got a video on this, and also in my science course. I definitely go into a lot more detail about this. So you're given the radius is 8, 45-degree central angle. We want to know the length of that green arc. So I'll give you guys a minute or 2 to try this one out on your own. If you want to post your answers in chat, that would be cool. You don't have to. I'll give the answer in a second. And in fact, I'm going to have to solve this. So we're all going to take a couple minutes to solve this. I'll be right back. Got to get my calculator, and then we'll go from there. So go ahead, take a minute or 2, see if you come up with an answer for this problem. So what's the answer to this one? Now, there's a formula for these. I guess the general formula you can use for this if you want to go to the formula route, and I'll show you another way to do it in a second, which is basically like the formula, but it's more intuitive, is you do theta over 360 times 2 pi r, or if you're in radians, theta over 2 pi times 2 pi r, where theta is this angle in the middle. So if you plug this in, theta is 45, r is 8, you'll get the answer, which in this case is going to be 6.28. Now, what's the more intuitive way to get this one? And this is the way that I like. It kind of explains where this formula comes from. And it works like this. The first thing we can figure out is what is the circumference of this circle. The circumference we know is 2 pi r. So in this case, it's going to be 2 times pi times 8, or 16 pi. All right, fine. We know this green segment, this green arc, I should say, is some fraction of the 16 pi, right? It's not the whole thing. It's just a piece of it. What we can figure out is what fraction it's supposed to be, and the key measure here is going to be that central angle of 45. The total number of degrees in a circle is 360. So this wedge would represent 45 out of 360 degrees of the circle. That is the fraction of the circle this wedge represents. And accordingly, it is also going to be 45 out of 360th of the area of the circle. And importantly for our purposes, 45 out of 360th of the arc of the circumference. This reduces to 1/8, right? Yeah. So what this is telling us is this is 1/8 of the circle. So this green segment is going to be 1/8 of the circumference, which is 16 pi. And that's 2 pi. So 2 pi is correct. You got the right answer for that one, right? So that is totally right. So 2 pi or 6.28, either of those would be correct. So yeah, that's how you do it. The key is to understand this central angle tells you what fraction of the circle you're dealing with. So from here, we could get the sector area. The sector area would just be 1/8 times pi r squared times the area. So 1/8 times pi times 8 squared. And that would be 8 pi, and whatever that is. So it's all about that central angle. It tells you what fraction of the circle you're dealing with, and therefore what fraction of the area and what fraction of the circumference. Would you recommend studying vocab to improve the reading section, or mostly focus on practicing reading passage and go over the answer. Mostly this. I mean, it depends exactly on your situation. I think I know you were in the 600s, I think, right? Yeah. So you might benefit a little bit from doing some vocab prep, and I have a vocab list on my website. So go ahead and check that out. It's available for free, vocab list. So you can use that to learn. So even if you do that, though, this is going to be the most important thing to do. Vocab can help to some extent, but especially short term, taking it in August. Generally, I recommend focusing on things that you have more control over. So that would be focusing on reading practice, reading sections, writing, math. You're much more likely to get more points out of your time rather than studying vocab lists. But you can try. It's not, the worst thing you could do.